It was a crisp autumn afternoon, the kind of day that promised the warmth of cozy nights ahead. Jason, a 28-year-old Black CVS employee, was finishing up his shift at the local pharmacy. The aisles were emptying out, and the familiar, almost comforting smell of medicine and cleaning supplies filled the air. He had just finished restocking the shelves and was eagerly anticipating the moment he could finally head home and relax. As he checked his phone, he saw the notification. His Lyft driver was waiting just around the corner. It was a relief. The day had been long, and he was ready to unwind after a hard day's work. He grabbed his coat and stepped out into the cool air, making his way to the bench that sat just outside the CVS store. It was a perfect spot, away from the hustle and bustle inside, where he could wait for his ride in peace. The street was alive with the usual noises of city life. Honking cars, the occasional shout of a pedestrian, and the faint sound of distant music from passing car. Jason took a deep breath, feeling the crisp autumn air fill his lungs. There was something so grounding about this time of day, so he pulled out his phone to check the Lyft app again. The ride was still a few minutes away, but he was in no rush. He leaned back on the bench, feeling the worn wood beneath him, and let out a contented sigh. His fingers scrolled mindlessly through his phone, checking social media and reading through texts. Life felt simple in this moment. He never expected it would be the last peaceful moment he'd have for the next several hours. Time passed slowly, as it often does when you're waiting. Jason glanced up occasionally, watching the stream of cars and people moving by. He took in the changing leaves, their colors shifting from green to brilliant oranges and reds, a reflection of the season's inevitable march. The occasional car would drive past, some slowing to navigate the parking lot, others rushing down the street, lost in the rhythm of city life. Jason's eyes stayed on his phone, flicking through the notifications without really reading them. 5 minutes. The app chimed again, and Jason looked down at his phone, confirming the notification. His Lyft driver was around the corner. He'd be here soon. But just as he was preparing to stand up, a loud, almost menacing sound cut through the air, the rumble of a police car pulling into the CVS parking lot. Jason didn't think much of it at first. It wasn't unusual to see a police car now and then, especially in a busy shopping area like this. But then he felt it, a strange sensation that sent a chill down his spine. He glanced up, and his gaze met that of the officer sitting in the patrol car. The officer's eyes lingered on him for a second too long. Jason, feeling the weight of that stare, quickly returned his phone, trying to shake the feeling of unease that had settled over him. But the unease grew. The police car rolled forward slowly, coming to a stop directly in front of him. Jason's heart beat a little faster as he kept his eyes on his phone. Maybe if he just ignored them, they would move on. But that wasn't what happened. The officer opened the door and stepped out, walking toward him with slow, deliberate steps. The uniformed figure approached, and Jason couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The officer stopped just in front of the bench, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. "What are you doing here?" the officer asked, his tone blunt and cold. Jason blinked in surprise, momentarily unsure how to respond. He'd been in this area countless times before, sitting on this exact bench, waiting for rides. "I'm just waiting for my ride," Jason said, trying to keep his voice calm. The officer didn't seem satisfied. His eyes narrowed as he looked Jason up and down. "Why are you sitting here on this bench?" he asked, his voice sharp. "It's not safe. We've had reports about loitering in this area." Jason's brow furrowed as confusion took over. Loitering? He was just sitting on a bench waiting for his Lyft to arrive. This had never been a problem before. "I work here at CVS," Jason explained. "I'm just waiting for my Lyft." But the officer's expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened. "Show me your ID," he demanded. Jason hesitated for a moment, the request catching him off guard. But it wasn't a question, it was a command. Slowly, he reached for his wallet, feeling the weight of the officer's stare as he did. He pulled out his ID and handed it over, still unsure of what exactly was happening. Was this really happening? Was he being questioned just because he was sitting on a bench waiting for a ride? Before he could process the situation any further, a second officer arrived on the scene. Jason could feel the tension rising in the air, the situation becoming more and more surreal. The two officers exchanged a quick glance, one that seemed to communicate some unspoken understanding. Jason's heart raced. What was going on? Let's see if we can sort this out, the first officer muttered. His words were clipped, and his gaze never left Jason. It was clear that the situation was escalating in a way that made Jason's stomach churn. Without another word, the first officer took a step forward, and before Jason could respond, he felt a firm grip on his arm. "You're coming with us," the officer said, his voice cold and unwavering. Jason froze. The words didn't make sense. This couldn't be happening. He tried to explain himself again, his voice shaking as he said, "I'm just waiting for my lift. Please, this is a mistake." But the officers didn't listen. They just kept pulling him toward the police car. The more he spoke, the less it seemed to matter. He hadn't done anything wrong. He was just waiting for a ride. But they were treating him like a criminal. With no warning, the handcuffs were slapped onto his wrists, and he was ushered into the back of the patrol car. Jason's mind raced as he sat there, his thoughts a chaotic blur. Why was this happening? Why had something so simple turned into this nightmare? He could hear the muffled sounds of confusion from bystanders who had witnessed the whole scene. They didn't understand. He didn't understand. His heart sank as the door to the police car slammed shut. The ride to the station was a blur. Jason's mind kept replaying the last few minutes over and over again, trying to make sense of it. The whole thing was absurd. He hadn't done anything wrong. He was just a man sitting on a bench waiting for his ride. But as the car sped through the city, he couldn't shake the feeling that the night had just begun, and that this would be a long, painful journey into a world that didn't seem to care about the truth. As the squad car rumbled down the street, Jason sat in the back seat, staring blankly at the partitions separating him from the officers in the front. His heart pounded, not just from the discomfort of the handcuffs digging into his wrists, but from the overwhelming disbelief of what had just transpired. What had he done to deserve this? How had something as simple as waiting for a lift turned into an arrest? His mind refused to make sense of it. Every time he thought about the events leading up to this, the surrealness of it all took over. Was he really being arrested for sitting on a bench? For waiting for a ride? The officers didn't speak much during the ride. Jason could hear fragments of their conversation. Nothing important, just mundane chatter about the traffic ahead and how dangerous loitering could be, especially in that area. Dangerous? He wasn't even doing anything. He had been waiting for his ride, a completely normal everyday action. But in their eyes, he had become a threat. Jason swallowed hard, trying to shake off the oppressive weight of the situation, but it stuck to him like glue. He glanced out of the window, watching the city pass by, but his thoughts remained clouded with anger and confusion. What had gone wrong? Why did the officer think he was doing something illegal? Was it because of the color of his skin? Jason knew the statistics. He had seen the news, read the stories about how people of color were treated by law enforcement, and yet he had never thought he'd become one of those statistics. Not like this. Not for something so simple. The car finally pulled up in front of the police station. Jason's chest tightened and his stomach churned. He had been arrested. He was about to be processed like a criminal for nothing more than waiting for a ride. As the officers escorted him inside, the cold, sterile atmosphere of the station hit him like a slap in the face. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed above him, and the sound of ringing phones and distant voices echoed down the long hallways. Jason felt small, invisible, as if the whole world had just turned its back on him. They pushed him into a holding cell, the cold concrete walls immediately enveloping him in an unforgiving silence. It was dimly lit, with a single flickering light above, casting strange shadows across the floor. Jason sat on the metal bench, his wrists still shackled, the cold seeping into his bones. Time moved differently in here, slower, heavier. He could feel his thoughts spinning faster and faster as he replayed the scene over and over again. How had it gone so wrong? How had the police gone from questioning him to arresting him? Had they even listened to his side of the story? No. All they saw was a black man sitting on a bench, and that was enough to make them think he was up to no good. Jason's mind kept circling back to that one question: was this what it felt like for every black person who faced discrimination and injustice at the hands of the police? Was this the reality they lived with every day? It wasn't just a statistic, it was his life now. The reality of being judged based on the color of his skin. He had always heard about these experiences, but hearing about it and living through it were two very different things. Hours passed, though it felt like days. Jason sat in that cold cell, his mind racing, his body tense with anger and frustration. Not a single officer had come to speak with him or give him any sort of explanation. He wasn't told what was happening next, nor why he was being held. He was just left there, alone with his thoughts and the painful reality of what had just happened. His mind kept drifting to his family. He thought about how his mother would react if she knew what had happened to him. Would she be scared for him? Would she be worried that this could happen again? Would she wonder if he would be safe the next time he left the house? Jason thought about his friends too, the ones who always told him to be careful, to stay out of trouble. Had they ever imagined something like this could happen to him? He had always done the right thing, kept his head down, followed the rules, and yet here he was, trapped in a holding cell for absolutely no reason. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, an officer came to the cell door. Jason stood up, his legs stiff from sitting so long. The officer unlocked the door and motioned for him to step out. Jason complied, still unsure of what was happening. The officer didn't speak as he led him down a narrow corridor and into a small office. There, another officer sat at a desk, flipping through a stack of papers. "We made a mistake," the officer said, avoiding Jason's gaze. He wouldn't look him in the eye, and Jason couldn't help but feel a surge of anger. A mistake? How could this be a mistake? How could they have made such a colossal error? The report was a misunderstanding, the officer continued, clearly uncomfortable. Someone saw you sitting out there, and they thought you were causing trouble. It's been cleared up. Jason couldn't believe what he was hearing. His mind raced as frustration and disbelief bubbled to the surface. "A misunderstanding," he repeated, his voice shaking with anger. "You had no right to arrest me. I was just sitting on a bench, waiting for my ride. How is that a crime?" The officer didn't respond to that. "We'll release you now," he said, his tone stiff, "but please be more aware of your surroundings." Jason felt his chest tighten as his anger reached a boiling point. "More aware of my surroundings?" he repeated, incredulous. "You're telling me to be more aware after you arrest me for doing nothing? You had no reason to treat me like this." The officer remained silent, not offering an apology or any real explanation. He just handed Jason his belongings and motioned for him to leave. Jason was numb, the weight of the entire experience still heavy on his shoulders. He was shaken, humiliated, and angry at the system, angry at the police, and angry at himself for not doing anything to stop it. When Jason stepped outside, the cool air hit him like a wave. For a moment, he stood there, feeling disoriented, as if the world hadn't quite settled back into place. He looked around, taking in the city streets that had once felt familiar but now seemed strange. He was free. Yes, but something had shifted in him, something had changed. It wasn't just the feeling of being wrongfully arrested that haunted him. It was the realization that this was the world he lived in, a world where his presence could be enough to make him a target, a world where people like him were treated as suspicious simply because of their skin color. As Jason stood there, trying to gather his thoughts, he heard the sound of a car pulling up. It was his Lyft. The driver had been waiting, no doubt wondering what had taken him so long. Jason climbed into the car, still shaken, but now more determined than ever. The ride back home was quiet. Jason stared out the window, the city passing by in a blur. His mind was focused on one thing, telling his story. The world needed to know what had happened. If it could happen to him, it could happen to anyone. He couldn't let it slide. He couldn't stay silent. And so, as the car pulled away, Jason knew that this was far from over. He would make sure the world heard the truth. He would make sure people knew that no one should ever be treated like this, that no one should ever have to live in fear simply for existing. If you believe in justice and want to hear more powerful stories like Jason's, make sure to subscribe to Expect Stories. Stay tuned for more gripping narratives that shed light on important issues and inspire change. Don't forget to like, share, and spread the word. Together, we can make a difference.